On December 18, 1988, 51-year-old Kent Allen Lawton was found dead in Tucson, Arizona, stabbed to death and buried in a shallow grave near a homeless camp. The perpetrator, a certain Tommy Lynn Sells, later testified that he had killed Lawton because he had refused to pay for drugs. 2 days later, his body was discovered, and no one suspected that this was already Sells' eighth victim. It was not until many years later, after another murder was committed on December 31st, 1999, that the true extent of his crimes came to light. For on that New Year's Eve, the horror took on a new form in the neighboring state of Texas. 10-year-old Crystal Surlees lived with her family in the small town of Del Rio. Her parents were planning to move from Texas to Kansas, and since the old house was almost empty, Crystal and her younger sister Marky were allowed to spend New Year's Eve at the home of their new friend, Kayleen Harris. The girls were full of anticipation, a new year, a new home, new friends. Kayleen Harris lived with her mother and siblings in a modest house on the outskirts of town. On New Year's Eve, the children watched movies together, ate popcorn, and made themselves comfortable. No one suspected that the house would soon become the scene of a crime that would shock the entire country. In the early hours of January 1st, 2000, Crystal was awakened by a scream. Still half asleep, she noticed that the light was on and that a strange man was standing at the bottom of her bunk bed. It was Tommy Lynn Sells. He covered Kayleen's mouth and stabbed her in the neck with a knife. Crystal froze. The man hadn't noticed her. Not yet. When the perpetrator turned to leave, he saw Crystal. Without hesitation, he grabbed the girl, pulled her out of bed, and stabbed her in the neck as well. Then he turned off the light, left the room, and closed the door behind him. Despite her serious wound, Crystal remained alive. With her last ounce of strength, she crawled to Kayleen, but her friend was already dead. The house was silent. Not a sound, not a sign of movement. Crystal feared the worst, that the perpetrator had murdered everyone in the house. Injured, bleeding, and terrified, Crystal finally gathered her strength. She crept through the house to check on her little sister Marky, but she couldn't speak, couldn't warn her or wake her up. The house was silent, and her fear grew. Crystal firmly believed that the killer might still be somewhere in the house. Despite her serious injuries, she decided to get help. In her nightgown and with a gaping wound on her neck, she stumbled out into the cold night. It was January 1st. The sky was dark and the air was freezing. But Crystal didn't let that stop her. In the distance, she spotted a light, a neighbor's house about a mile away. Barefoot and covered in blood, she made her way there. When she finally reached the front door, she knocked weakly. The man in the house hesitated at first, but when he saw the injured 10-year-old, he opened the door immediately. She couldn't speak, so he handed her a pen and a piece of paper. With a trembling hand, she wrote, "Hurry with the ambulance and will I survive?" The man tried to calm her down, called the emergency services, and did his best to stabilize her until the paramedics arrived. Shortly afterwards, an ambulance arrived and took Crystal to a nearby hospital. The doctors fought for her life. The neck wound was deep and she had lost a lot of blood. No one knew yet whether she would survive. Meanwhile, the police arrived at the Harris family home. Kayleen was dead, brutally murdered. Her mother and the other children had not noticed anything. Marky was also unharmed. He had been fast asleep and only opened his eyes when the police were already in the house. The investigators, now faced with a brutal murder and attempted manslaughter, initially focused on the surviving witness, Crystal. After undergoing emergency surgery and being stabilized, she was transferred to a larger hospital in San Antonio. There, doctors carefully monitored her condition while her mother remained by her side. Despite her serious injuries, Crystal was conscious and soon able to speak again. Her first question was about her friend Kayleen. Her mother hesitated at first to tell her the truth, but Crystal insisted. When she learned of her friend's death, she was devastated, but also determined. She wanted the killer caught. The police called in a sketch artist. Crystal described the perpetrator in detail: long, dark hair, an unkempt beard, angry eyes. When the sketch artist finished the picture, Crystal recognized him immediately. He looks exactly like him. The officers began searching databases and comparing photos of convicted criminals. Finally, they showed Crystal a selection, and she didn't hesitate. She pointed to a photo without saying a word. The man in the picture was Tommy Lynn Sells. He was 35 years old, lived in Del Rio, very close by, and had an extensive criminal record. The police immediately made their way to his home. It was a trailer. They knocked, but no one answered. The door was ajar, so they entered and found Tommy inside. He looked at them calmly and said, "I'm glad I finally got caught. I'm tired of doing this." Without asking what he was being arrested for, he allowed himself to be handcuffed. That same day, he confessed to the crime in every detail. Tommy Lynn Sells gave investigators a detailed account of what had happened on the night of the crime. He had entered the Harris family home through an open window. According to his statement, he had moved quietly through the house and seen all the sleeping residents. His target was Kayleen. He knew her vaguely and had already chosen her as his victim. He approached her, cut her underwear with a knife, and tried to sexually assault her, but the girl broke free and started screaming. Tommy reacted immediately. He covered her mouth, grabbed his knife, and stabbed her several times in the throat. He then wanted to leave the house, but then he noticed Crystal, who was lying motionless and distraught in the upper bed. She had seen everything. Sells decided to silence her too. He pulled her toward him, stabbed her in the throat, turned off the lights, and left the house. He was convinced that both girls were dead. The police asked him to accompany them to the crime scene. Without hesitation, Tommy reconstructed the crime, showing how he had moved, how he had opened the window and wielded the knife. He smiled as he did so. It quickly became clear to the investigators that this man felt no remorse. On the contrary, he seemed proud of what he had done. But the longer they talked to him, the clearer it became that this was not his first murder. Although Tommy had mainly come to the attention of the police in the past for theft, assault, and drunk driving, he had also raped a woman once and been sentenced to 4 years in prison for it. The investigators now began to suspect that there was much more to his criminal history. Tommy began to talk, more than the investigators had expected. On the way back from the Harris family home, he suddenly said, "I guess you want to know about the others." And then he opened up. Over the course of several weeks, he talked about his childhood, about abuse, about violence, and about the beginning of his criminal career. His mother was overwhelmed by raising him. His twin sister died young, and Tommy started drinking at the age of 7. At 10, he was raped himself. Shortly afterwards, he tried to get close to his own mother, naked in the middle of the night. The family did not respond by seeking help, but by fleeing. They moved away and left Tommy behind. From then on, he lived on the streets, got drunk regularly, and committed burglaries and thefts. At 15, he claimed, he committed his first murder. A man shot dead in his own home. The case remained unsolved. Since then, he said, he had traveled across the U.S. and committed numerous murders. In conversations with the police, he confessed to over 100 crimes. Investigators began to check his statements and quickly discovered that much of it was exaggerated, some of it invented. However, in at least 17 cases, his statements matched unsolved crimes exactly. In these cases, they considered him guilty, even though there was often no physical evidence left. Tommy enjoyed the attention. All interrogations took place in the presence of a journalist. He described the crimes with frightening composure, almost as if he were recounting stories from an adventure novel. It was clear that fame and impact meant more to him than the truth. If a crime brought him attention, he was willing to take credit for it, even if he hadn't committed it. In 1999, Tommy confessed to the murder of Kayleen Harris and the attack on Crystal, as well as 22 other killings, including 3 children. However, because the police found no conclusive evidence, He was ultimately charged with only 2 counts: the murder of Kayleen and the attempted murder of Crystal. The trial began 6 months after his arrest. The prosecution sought the death penalty. Crystal, now almost fully recovered physically, was determined to testify against him. When the time came, Tommy asked to be removed from the courtroom, but Crystal insisted that he remain. She described the night in detail, looking him straight in the eye. Tommy lowered his gaze. The defense presented no arguments against the death penalty. The verdict was death. Tommy was transferred to death row. 14 years later, in 2014, the sentence was carried out. In addition to Kayleen's relatives, the families of other alleged victims were present at the execution, as was Crystal. Tommy refused to say his last words. He just looked at a few acquaintances and smiled. Crystal, however, had never really found peace since then. She slept poorly, planned escape routes at night, imagined what she would do if he came back. Her relationship with her sisters improved. They now understood why Crystal had been so assertive in the past, out of concern, not arrogance. But even after Tommy Sell's death, the story did not end. In 2015, a woman who had seen a documentary about him came forward. Her mother had been murdered in 1982, and she and her sister had been injured. Another man, Rodney Lincoln, had been convicted. But the woman now recognized Tommy as the real perpetrator. Rodney was released after 36 years in prison, at the age of 77. A year later, in 2016, Crystal was threatened online. A man sent her photos of crime scenes, accused her of not saving Kayleen, threatened to kill her, and even sent her his own address. The police were able to find him quickly. Crystal has given several interviews since then. She said she was just glad to be alive. She no longer thinks about Tommy. The true number of his victims will probably never be known, but at least he is dead and can no longer hurt anyone. Tommy had no home, no permanent address. He hitchhiked across the country, striking everywhere, silently and without a trace. The police eventually called him the coast-to-coast killer. His trail was scattered across the country, but one victim survived, and she spoke, and through her voice his silence ended, and so did his life.